Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So we've got a really exciting presentation today. We've got Kenn here with us today. I'm going to hand you over to our CEO, Peter Ali, in a moment. Just thought I'd let you know that because we're in a webinar environment today, it's a little bit trickier to ask questions than maybe some of our previous webinars you have joined us for will be. So what we'll do today is, if you've got any questions during the presentation, please pop them in the chat and I'll monitor them for you. Kenn will check in throughout the presentation and we'll bring up any burning questions or any trends, and Kenn will address them today. But if there's anything that we can't get to today or that are left over, or you've got any burning questions after the presentation, all the details will be in an email tomorrow, so you'll have plenty of opportunity to follow up with those as well. But I'm going to pass you over to Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie, and welcome everyone to Municipal Works Australia's webinar series. For those of you who don't know, Municipal Works Australia, we're a non-for-profit industry association that provides professional learning and networking opportunities for people working in municipal works. It's both people working in local government for councils in the workspace, as well as people working in the companies that support the industry. We're very lucky today and privileged actually to have Kenn, who's the Principal Engineer for Safe Systems Solutions Proprietary Limited. They're a company that specialises in road safety engineering. And Kenn's really a world leader in applied road safety engineering, and I've received a hell of a lot of really nice feedback from members when we floated this webinar, who are all tuning in today to hear Kenn. Before Kenn worked at Safe Systems Solutions, he worked at Vic Roads, that's the Victorian Government's road authority, and during his career he's undertaken over 400 road safety audits, some of the world's most high profile and complex infrastructure projects. He's also been a lead trainer, and he applies his trade at a variety of companies, including Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Thailand, the Philippines, and the US. So, without wasting any more time, I'd like to introduce Kenn to talk about the top 5 road safety treatments for local government. Thank you, Kenn.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Katie. And wonderful to see so many people flocking through that virtual door, and many familiar names, which is great. They've come to those training courses you mentioned, Peter, across Australia, New Zealand, and in different places where we've been talking to local governments and trying to build up capability capacity in road safety auditing, road safety infrastructure, different types of infrastructure, safe system assessments and the like. So might be a couple of familiar photos to some people, but I'm sure a few people will be quite interested in what we see. Now, we're not going to be able to get into the depths of detail about some of these treatments just with the time we have, but I'm, of course, always happy to for people to follow up and chat to me further about any of the treatments. And some of them come with all sorts of tricky design challenges, which we love rolling our sleeves up and getting into, as many of you do. Now, I'm just checking you can see my slides there.
Yep, all good, Kenn.
Great. Okay, well, let's get into it. So we've got the top 5 road safety treatments for local government roads and streets. And I always use that term roads and streets now as much as I possibly can, because we talk about road safety, but a lot of it is street safety as well, and thinking about these urban environments, streets for people as well, in terms of those movement and place areas that have that real place value. So we're going to talk about roads and streets. Now, my contact details are there. Peter and Katie will be sharing those afterwards as well. Anyway, there's a QR code to my LinkedIn. And I've also put my colleague Max McCardle's contact details there. He's our active transport lead at Safe Systems Solutions. And you've probably seen him riding around or walking around your streets doing audits or the like. But certainly he's helped me out with a few of the examples that I'll be using. I've got a few QR codes throughout this presentation just to try and help you, direct you to a few things that may help you in your journey to make your roads and streets as safe as possible. Okay, so the basis of how we've determined these top 5, a lot of the work stems from this TAC Safe System Review that we undertook with my colleagues and friends, Bruce Corbin and Hafez Alavi, where we really dug into the details of 9 local government areas in Victoria, in so very different types of local governments, inner urban, and then that sort of outer metro and then rural environments. And we tried to look at what are the systemic risks. And what do we mean by systemic risks? We mean areas that have characteristics that we know present death and serious injury, and they occur throughout. They may or may not yet have caused death or serious injury. So it's not about chasing the lightning strikes in some of those areas, but it's about understanding systemic risk. Also, just recently been having a wonderful time going out with local government representatives across Victoria and doing safe system capability capacity building with lots of them. There's a few photos on the screen, may recognize a few faces. A few of you, I think, are on this webinar, and certainly stuff that we've got from working with local governments in Queensland, New South Wales, and New Zealand especially, and a bit more nowadays in South Australia and Tasmania, which is wonderful. In terms of what we're dealing with, local government, and many of you know this very well, but local governments manage 82% of the Australian road network. Nearly half the crashes occurring on local government managed roads. And if you look at a crash rate perspective, we're about double that of the state managed road. So it shows you there's huge opportunity for us to address some of this systemic risk. And if we look at a little bit about where this is happening on local government roads, that is, we've got the major cities, and inner regional areas dominating that. Outer regional coming in there as well. Remote, very remote. While it's smaller numbers there, the rates are really high. And if we look at sort of trends, we're not performing well across all the road network. Local government, especially having challenges as well there, and actually trending up in our deaths and serious injuries as well. Okay, but let's get into the top 5 straight away. So I've told you a little bit about how we've done that. The other thing I need to say, though, is that while these are what we're looking to, these treatments are addressing those systemic risks I talked about on the local government network, the other thing we've overlaid into this is the real desire we have as a community to increase active travel, more sustainable travel, so people walking and riding. So that's sort of overlaid, especially in these urban treatments that we're going to put up. So at number 5, I'm going to show you one of the sort of risks we're trying to address here. So hopefully that's streamed for you. I'm going to play it again in case it didn't stream for you. So Katie's giving me the thumbs up, but you saw that. But very scary, a little bit of video footage there of a dooring incident. Now, that's the one there. And I mentioned my colleague, Max. We were out doing a cycling audit around Melbourne. He had the 360 camera on and was videoing, and I just happened to have to avoid one of the doors myself there, which is, for those who ride a lot, a common occurrence. But this is only part of the systemic risk we're talking about for cycle lanes, roads with traveling vehicles next to the cyclist. We also have that concern of those vehicles drifting into cycle lanes or hitting cyclists one way or another. So those risks all combined are a serious safety concern for us, and also discourage people from getting out and riding, especially some of those people that are a little less confident in riding, and these sort of things really discourage that riding. So at number 5, in terms of the treatments, we're going to go with protected bike lanes, and I've been somewhat generic in that, just calling them protected bike lanes, because there's many ways these can be designed. I'll show you a few examples of that, but I'm sure you've got many others. But when we say protected, we do mean sort of something physical to protect riders from vehicles. Now, the other thing I'm doing here is grabbing you a generic crash reduction factor. So that's a crash reduction factor, for those not familiar with that. It is what we would expect to reduce in terms of deaths and serious injuries, sometimes other injuries as well, but deaths and serious injuries with the implementation of this treatment when it wasn't there before. And these are produced from what we call like sort of macro studies, lots of these treatments going in, looking at before crash data and after data on lots and lots of them. You can't really do a crash reduction factor just off one. Your statistical significance isn't quite there. So 50% crash reduction factor for protected bike lanes. As I say, it'll vary depending on some specifics. But the way you can do that varies. And you can see here some of these concrete blocks used to separate the riders from the faster vehicles, and also including the parking in this sort of Copenhagen style bike lane where the parking is pushed out. The cyclists get to run curbside and be away from any of that risk. Okay. In the sort of specifics of how you go about designing these, there's all sorts of things to consider. Certainly intersections and access points are a real area of risk still being there, and those need to be designed with good sight lines. And there's some other little features and tricks you can do, such as putting either raised surface or cobblestones at any sort of turn-in point. There isn't one here, but I'll sort of show you. Can really enhance that point. So a vehicle turning in has to significantly slow and hopefully then see riders as they approach. 2-lane Copenhagen lanes don't tend to operate as safely as single direction ones. And that's just because of that little surprise of a cyclist coming from the other direction for this driver turning in. But if you have long lengths where there are not these access points, these can be a really good treatment. And especially also if you're a little constricted on road width, your cross section, because you don't need to provide as much of this buffer because you only need to do it on one side. If you've got the other one, you need to provide that extra buffer. And there's lots of different sort of treatments coming in. I had some wonderful discussions with Michael Langdon up in Queensland, who many of you know about exactly where do we draw the line and define it as a physical feature separating a bike lane or not. And Michael's going to put out some information on that shortly, I think, because it is a little bit grey. But really interested in some of these bolt down features, some quicker to install, lower cost ways of doing it. It can also be a little way to get your community comfortable with it. We know some people might be concerned with it. You can put it out as a trial, spike down, and they're a little more comfortable that it could be removed if it's not performing. And these pop-up ones that we've been seeing coming around, this is obviously a larger arterial road, but certainly the idea there to be able to start putting up pop-up infrastructure, it's significantly increasing cycling and safety perception and safety as well. Opportunity also within this to do some landscaping, do some beautification of an area using different planting or the like. Again, a little bit of sort of getting your road safety auditors involved and thinking about snagging and things. And so maybe working with the landscape architects to make sure we've got a really safe design in there as well. Another wonderful one from Bendigo showing that you can really take some of those roads that have generous cross sections at the moment and are car dominated and rearrange them, provide these wonderful separated facilities for cyclists, get more people on the bike in a much safer environment. If you go to use barrier systems to separate as well, that's something that's sort of a really wonderful treatment. I just want to flag the back of a W-beam system, and there are many different types of W-beam systems out there, but a back of a W-beam system can be a snag hazard, can be a sharp edge for a rider if they had to leave the path for any reason. So things like backing boards, putting a back-to-back W-beam system, or post capping as a sort of a minimum there if you're doing that. But really, some of those back-to-back systems can work really well. Okay, and at any point, Katie, you can jump in with questions if you have any.
Nothing's come through yet, Ken.
Well, everybody, feel free to pop your questions in the chat as we go. I'll see how many I get to in the time we have allowed. Otherwise, I will be able to follow up. Okay, the next one I'm going to jump into here, another video showing sort of the risk in action. Not to say we wait for crashes, but so we're seeing there these crossroads. Now, these crossroads occur, yes, in these urban environments, also lots of local government, rural environments as well. And we have bad angles. We think about the angle of crash a lot. We have bad angles, we have bad speeds. Now, there's a whole lot of looking into why these are occurring in terms of are there see-through effects? Are there appropriate warning? Is the signage good? How's the skid resistance, the surfacing, the line marking, and all of these sort of things? Really important to be having a look at and doing absolutely everything we can to minimize the chance this happens. But we do have to focus on the severity of the ones that are still going to occur. So we're going to try and minimize those crashes, but what happens when the crash or the mistakes happen? And this is where I'm going to go to one that's not new, the old roundabout. The roundabout is such an amazing road safety feature when we think about that vehicle-to-vehicle collision risk. It also works really well for motorcyclists as well. Not quite as good as cars, but really effective for motorcyclists as well. We give a crash reduction factor of somewhere around the 60%, could be a lot higher than that just for cars. And depending on, is it a one-lane roundabout versus a two-lane roundabout, and how's it all configured? I'm going to talk about pedestrians and cyclists at roundabouts a little bit later, because that's definitely something that we need to work harder on. But in those areas where there aren't pedestrians and cyclists, out in your rural areas, or there are less pedestrians or cyclists, just a generic roundabout is an absolutely amazing feature. And why is that? Why is that? Well, bit of road safety engineering 101 for you here. Conflict points. A conflict point is a spot where the crash can happen. So you've got two vehicle paths, they cross. You can see for vehicle-to-vehicle crashes at a single lane roundabout, there are just less conflict points. And the conflict points that are there are much friendlier conflict points. They're not those very harsh angles that can occur. So when you crash at a roundabout, or when people crash at a roundabout, there's a little bit of bouncing off going on, as opposed to a very harsh crash at speed. So if you remember your vectors, I do a little bit of vectors with people in our training courses. But anyway, the resulting energy is out there more than it is out there. The other one is that people drive in all states of consciousness. They're half asleep. They're thinking about the fight they had with their partner. They've worked a double shift. Maybe they've had a drink or two. They're just not concentrating. And they will run straight through a give way sign or even a set of traffic signals, but they're far, far, far less likely to run straight through a roundabout. It's just got all these characteristics that wake people up, bring them back to the driving cars. They look around at a particularly high risk spot. So that's a wonderful win in road safety. And even roundabouts that are much smaller and don't necessarily have those particular civil infrastructure features in the middle do an amazing job in disrupting ultimate priority. So a driver approaching from any direction in this UK mini roundabout, for example, will not think that they can run straight through at speed, because they're going to have to at least look around. Okay, they might go through a little faster than we would like, because we don't have as much horizontal deflection. We can work on that with some other ways. But that disruption in ultimate priority is an amazingly effective feature. And I mentioned that you can do things like a little bit of speed cushions or speed humps or these sorts of things on the approach to some of these roundabouts that have that straight run through. And for those of you who know Chris Davis up in Mildura, and he talks all the time about his wonderful cheap installation of a compact implant roundabout. And this was the intersection before. So we've got fast vehicle speeds through here, what we call the bullet vehicle. They're usually the ones that do the damage. And then the roundabout goes in essentially with very, very minimal works, and wonderful feature. Cost under $50,000 at the time, probably a little more expensive than that, but we're not talking about those sort of 500,000, $1 million, or if you get onto the arterial road network, you're up at 7-10 million, no worries for a full-size roundabout, which is, an extreme amount of money when we can think about the amount of areas we could treat for something like that. So there's another little bit of the compact roundabout. You can see some important features there, being some features to slow vehicles on the approach to the roundabout as well. I mean, this is kind of like the US four-way stop, just with a circle in the middle and a bit of speed calming on the approach. It's really what it is, but it's a spot of higher risk where people have slowed down, they're more alert, they're more awake. This one actually performs really well for pedestrians and cyclists as well, but I've got some other things to throw into the mix on that a little bit later on. And it's wonderful to see some of the low-cost innovation we're seeing in roundabout design across Australia and New Zealand. I'm really enjoying these ones from Dunedin, seeing there, again, basically what I would call a mini roundabout, a little bit of spike down cushioning, and a little bit of, not even curb works, line marking and the flexible paddles around to delineate the intersection. Low cost, getting high effectiveness in terms of slowing vehicles through that area. Does it meet all of our design standards and performances and everything like that? No. But you really got to ask yourself, are we getting a safer environment for all road users than not doing this at all? And if that is the case, we are obligated to move this through in the best possible way we can. So lots of good features coming out. Okay. At number 3, and now this one, I'm going to give you a little bit of an analogy to start you off here. Got a high-rise building. Falling from the high-rise building, or let's push a car off the high-rise building. From the first floor, when they hit the ground, they'll be traveling at 30 kilometers an hour. Up on the next floor, we're at 40 kilometers per hour. We jump up a couple of floors to 60. It starts to spread out a little bit, 70, 80. We're up at around the 13th or 14th floor at 100 kilometers an hour. Okay? So that's just trying to bring us speed to energy to death potential. Get that mix in our head. Humans are really, really good at understanding energy and risk associated with falling from heights. Very, very bad at it on the horizontal plane. Okay? We just never evolved to understand that you could travel at 100 kilometers an hour. So our understanding of that risk is warped. But when we just put it on that vertical, okay, that makes a bit of sense. So we better just drop a car from, say, there around that floor, just to show you the impact force. There you go. But let's go up to the 14th floor, shall we? Oh, actually, before I do that, I'll show you actually a bit of side impact with poles, because another interesting misconception is the amount that the vehicle can handle in terms of force. So you'll see the bottom video going sort of slow motion there. That's the ANCAP side impact pole test. So this would be the equivalent of pushing a car off the first floor and having it land on a pole just before it hits the ground. Okay. That's at 30 kilometers an hour. You can see the intrusion into the cabin, to the driver's area, 30 kilometers an hour. If we do one at 60 kilometers an hour, and I sort of warn you now, this is a very violent incident you're about to see. At 60 kilometers per hour, the amount of energy and violence in that crash with a point source hazard is absolutely unsurvivable for the occupants of the vehicle. The best chance at survivability in these is that the car is ripped apart and that occupants are lucky enough not to be in the direct line of that pole as it slices through the vehicle. That's only impact speed at about 60 kilometers an hour. I shouldn't have speed limit here. I should have impact speed, by the way. That's but people recognize that quite well. 60 kilometers an hour. But let's go up to that 14th floor, as I said. Okay. And so we've got a balcony on the 14th floor. And we don't say to people, okay, don't fall off the edge. And we don't put a white line there and say, okay, everybody always stay this side of the white line, because the forces are just unsurvivable. Humans are going to potentially fall off that. We put up a railing as an absolute. Force is unsurvivable. We're going to do physical railing here. Sure, we're going to try and make sure people don't, walk out there and do too much of that. But the railing is absolutely essential. I think you see where I'm about to go with this, which is to say that when it comes to a roadside and we've got trees and even rollover risk for that matter, what do? We either say, just stay on the black stuff, or maybe we put a white line there and say, make sure you always stay on this side of that. So it is a fundamental rethink in the way we think about roadside risk, roadside and median risk. And what we need to be thinking is in a very similar manner. We need that railing. We need that barrier system. So when people make that mistake, they hit a barrier system rather than falling 14 floors or hitting a tree or the like. And it also applies for the middle of the road, where head-on crash is unsurvivable as well. We've got to think of that line just like the edge of the building as well. So road safety barriers are my next one. And the crash reduction factor depends on a number of different things: the type of barrier system you use, whether you're putting it just on the outside or in the middle as well. But we're somewhere between 60 and 90% of death and serious injury for cars and motorcyclists. Now, you may have heard some people complaining about the dangers of barrier systems for motorcyclists. A lot of it is not founded on any sort of base of research or evidence or the like. And we know that motorcyclists get some good benefit from barrier systems, any type of barrier system really. But we know there are features that can be added to make barrier systems safer for motorcyclists, such as underrun protection, which is a railing underneath as well, down here, and some other little features. Also thinking about your barrier choice and your design specifics. Now, barrier systems do cost a bit, and I know I was trying to make sure I looked for lots of low-cost or possible low-cost treatments for local government, but using these, targeting your highest risk locations to start with, is absolutely a good investment still. Yes, it's going to cost a little bit more, and we can access a lot of government funding from state governments and federal governments for road safety initiatives, and putting forward barrier systems with these wonderful crash reduction factors as a really good business case for that investment. Now, just for the designers out there and those doing a little bit of thinking around roadside risk, I just want to flag the new Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6, which does not follow clear zones. So if you're still thinking about clear zones, we're not following that in most jurisdictions. New South Wales is still following clear zone theory in terms of roadside risk, but I'm not sure what Western Australia is doing. I'm not even sure what side of the road they drive on. And I joke, but not sure what they're up to in terms of roadside risk assessment methodologies. But certainly Queensland, Victoria, South Australia are following the network roadside risk intervention threshold, which is a different risk assessment methodology for roadside risk. It has lots more science behind it than the old clear zone. We talk about the significance of the hazard as well, in terms of it's very different to be hitting a pole versus hitting a building or hitting some frangible infrastructure. So you start to categorize the severity of the risk, the likelihood of the risk, and there's a bit more to it. It's a bit of a process, but it's something you should be getting your head around if you're in those jurisdictions. Interesting one for local governments to set their own risk threshold if they want to go down that track. The states are setting a risk threshold, which basically they say under this risk threshold is acceptable, above this risk threshold is unacceptable and needs to be treated in some way. Okay? Barriers is a wonderful way to bring that risk down, but you could do it through other ways, certainly the management of speed or through different further offsets of hazards and these sort of things. But that is currently being set by the states. Local governments could set their own network roadside risk intervention threshold if they wanted. It's a bit of a process, but that might be something that's happening. I've got a couple of colleagues heading up to Rockhampton to have a chat with the council up there, do a bit of a training session on this process, barrier design, and start to unpack what this network roadside risk intervention threshold change means for Rockhampton City Council and how they can utilise this with the TMR requirements or adapting where they need. Okay, going into number 2. Now, let's have a look at our little video here. Ooh. Okay. So we've had a pedestrian make a mistake, as many pedestrians do. The vehicle traveling at a low speed in a low speed environment. Okay. And this is, as it says there, safe system in action. So we need to be absolutely clear that pedestrians will be walking on the road, making mistakes, running for their bus, intoxicated. Then they'll just be trying to cross the road and travel, pushing prams, walking around. That is what happens in these urban environments. And the motorized vehicle going through these environments needs to be at a speed where if something happens, it's well within survivable territory or within survivable territory. Far too long we've been in a blame culture of saying to that pedestrian should not have done that, or they walked against the red. Okay, we're going to try to encourage people to be a little bit better in that perspective, but we absolutely need to get ourselves in the position of understanding it's going to happen, and our responsibility as those who manage, design and operate roads and streets is to ensure that when crashes happen, they're within tolerable forces for the human body, that it's not going to kill or seriously injure our community. In a recent update to the Austroads Guide to Road Safety, Part 3, which is in speed and speed management, I was involved in that. We chucked in this diagram, which is an adaptation of a diagram from Europe. But basically it says that speed is your governor, right? If you know how much force the human body can handle in terms of the biomechanical limits of the human body, like when we're struck, what speeds can we likely survive? right? Then you can simply look at, well, what are your road users? Are they old people? Are they frail? Are they, big statured people? We've got to think about all people out there. What's your road environment like? And what's the vehicle fleet look like in terms of safety features, pedestrian safety features, airbags over the bonnet and the like, right? You take all of that into account, and then you just filter it through the appropriate speed, and you have a safe transport system. Speed is the governor. So I've got their area speed limits, and that's really what I wanted to put as the number 2, is to think about area-wide speed limit reduction and getting that broadly across all these areas. I've got urban as an example there, but I also say that this should be applied to the rural network as well, and looking and thinking about, can we manage some risk across wide areas? I'll pop this up because there's very tactical ways you can do this. So going one at a time at a speed zone reduction in an area with high risk is a real battle. And certainly you do that, and then you've got to get it through council, and you've got political pressures, and you've got all sorts of community saying bits and pieces. A more sort of advanced way of thinking about that is to get yourself a speed strategy going, a speed review of the whole council or the like. This happened to be one we were working with Mildura Rural City Council, and really thinking, okay, what does a future look like with the management of speed? And certainly it can be thinking about urban areas, and up in Mildura, the sort of irrigation area, and then the wider rural network. And you're able to start to map out, okay, we've got all these different risks, and this can be done with all sorts of wonderful methodologies, OSRAP, IRAP, IRR. Other people are coming up with different ways to do this. So you can get a picture of risk existing, and then you can sort of rearrange the speed zoning based on those risk areas, your movement in place categorization, and start to map out a future where you can see some significant risk reductions. And we did that with the Mildura area, really set out some of these large areas for lower area-wide speed limits, and then looking at more of those irrigation areas and bringing them down from just the default inappropriate 100 kilometers an hour down to some lower speeds. And then you can take this through council. Okay, you need to then sort of set a platform for them to understand some of this, the risk associated with it, the benefits this will give in active transport. You get some of the community to advocate for it because they've got to walk on these streets, or their kids have to walk through these streets. They want to see this. You bring that sort of swell together. You can also even get your asset management people in, showing them it's actually going to cost less on some of this rural network, and we've got a little bit lower speed in terms of asset management. We're going to take some people off running on our local government road because it's higher speed than the parallel arterial road when we bring ours down, and then we'll move them to the road that's got the higher infrastructure there, the big arterial road that runs sort of generally parallel with it. So there's a lot we can do to this, and we get wonderful road safety benefits, plus all the other benefits of more people walking, cycling, healthier community, lower emissions in a lot of these speeds as well. So it's just wins all round. And yeah, I'm really encouraging a lot of this 80 kilometre per hour in wide swathes of areas. Okay, I know some of the community aren't quite there yet, but Mornington Peninsula Shire Council just really, they paved the way for the last decade and more in this space, and showed that actually, no, a lot of the community do want some of these lower, more appropriate speeds on their rural network. And it's just that if you go out to the public and say, hey, what do you think of us making this 80 kilometers per hour? A lot of the feedback you're going to get is that they don't want it. Why? Because the people who are motivated enough to actually write a letter in, they're angry about this. They're motivated to do something. But if you do actual sort of broad surveying of the community, random sampling of your community, you discover that you actually have huge support for this. Yes, there's people who don't want it. There's always people who don't want change. right? But there is a lot of support from them. They're just not those really vocal, squeaky wheel, jumping up and down people. So taking that sort of survey data to your council as well can be an extremely effective thing to say, actually, the bulk of our community want this. These people don't, but there's all this good to it. We've got overwhelming support, and here it is. Now, you might be able to get those 30s to start with, but certainly down to area 40s are very, very well established across Australia and New Zealand. And so even those have some wonderful benefits. I also popped in here in terms of what benefit do we get? Well, I think some of you are thinking about compliance now. Are we actually going to get compliance with that 80? And the thing is that, okay, we could do more with enforcement, and there's lots of exciting enforcement things coming around, like point-to-point mobile enforcement, and we will continue to work on all that. But if you can get small reductions in speed, they actually magnify out to really big reductions in death and serious injury. And you can see this. It's actually a fourth power relationship for fatal crashes to speed change, and it's a third power relationship for serious injuries. So that means that really just small changes in speeds bring about really big changes in the amount of our community killed and seriously injured on these roads. So it's worth it, even if you're getting smaller reductions. You still want to do some push to get some enforcement out there and try and get things better, but don't throw it out if you just don't think you're going to get all the compliance you want. Okay, down to our number one.
Ken,
And
sorry, I might just, before we get down to number one, a lot of really good questions come through. Some you've answered, but
right.
You want to just, well, finish off with number one as a crescendo, but do you want to throw some questions at Ken?
I'm going to, let's do that, Peter, because I'll also give an opportunity to people to pop in the chat if they want to have a guess what number one is. I gave them a little clue.
Okay.
So pop that in the chat. Let's not go with some of these questions.
Katie, I might start. What do you, we had one question. What do you mean by snagging? You mentioned it in reference to cyclists behind W beams.
Yeah, great point. Sorry, I do sometimes use terminology that I think everybody knows, but often nobody knows. Snagging is just that sharp point that grabs onto the body or the pedal or the handlebar. It snags that. If you do any fishing, you'll know about getting a snag, but it's also that one where it catches. Thank you.
Dave from Omnigroup asked about skid resistance. How many audits of intersections is skid resistance actually checked for compliance?
Yeah, it's a good point. And skid resistance is one of those really important things in the suite of trying to reduce crashes happening in the first place. And we know we get benefits for skid with appropriate skid resistance in terms of some of the crashes, bringing them more within tolerable limits, because you've got better grip, you hit at lower speed, and then we've got lower energy. So certainly, I think in the auditing industry, we can do more in that space. We'll often look at maybe some of the crash data or something like that. Not that audits are driven by crash data, but to see if there's wet weather incidents that have happened. Also a bit of a visual look, but I think it is something appropriate for us to continue to think about. But I also want people to be thinking about the fundamental changes to those intersections to ensure vehicle speeds are appropriate, be that a roundabout, a raised intersection, or other features to keep that speed within check. Other real benefits of skid resistance are for motorcyclists on curves is an absolutely wonderful one. On the approach to pedestrian crossings, where again, we know it's a point where people might have to stop a little bit harder than they might first think. So it's a really, really good treatment.
We had another question here, Ken, about other guidelines that you could recommend other than Ausroads.
Yeah, so Austroads sets a lot of guidance, okay, and Austroads is really funded by the different states and New Zealand and local government association to pool funding, to do research, and then to produce all this overall guidance, okay, and they have the Guide to Road Design, the Guide to Road Safety, Guide to Traffic Management, and the list goes on. They are guides, though. I want you to remember those as guides. Too often do we see designers treating the Guide to Road Design like a standard, like an absolute, right? It's guidance. If there's any part of the Austroads Guide I want you to read in absolute detail, the Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 1. It's the least read, it's the most important, because it says this is guidance, right? And your job as designers and engineers is to think about the context, think about how we can get the outcome we desire in different ways. Here's a few ideas, here's a bit of guidance, okay? That's super important. But what happens then is Austroads does that, and then the jurisdictions will look at that and maybe they want to enhance one bit or another. So they will put supplementary guidance out. And there is a heap of supplementary guidance across the jurisdictions. Queensland does amazing supplementary guidance on a lot of things. They have really in-depth ones. Victoria gets into it a lot as well. New South Wales doesn't have as much in some areas, but they're there as well. New Zealand does lots of supplementary guidance. So depending on your jurisdiction, you'll find lots of supplements for different topics. So go to your supplementary guidance. Then we've got Australian standards as well, setting those different standards. And it depends, again, what your topic is and the specifics of it. And they can go into very minute detail with the Australian standards, as many of you. So then there's things like the Infrastructure Design Manual, which a lot of local governments use as well. So like we could do another 2 hours on all of the different documents and all of the different things. But that's sort of a general overview.
Thanks, Ken. Look, there's other questions, but look, we're running short of time. We want to get on to number 1. I forgot to mention at the start that Kenn will also be presenting at our National Municipal Works and Engineering Conference on the 20th, 21st of March next year in Bendigo. Look, we'll be sending out some information about that to everyone that's enrolled here. You'll also be getting information on Kenn's company, Safe System Solutions website, which has got a lot of information, case studies, and then there's contact details there. So I'll leave it at that, Kenn, and let you get on to number 1, and I'll let Katie finish the questioning if we have time after we've heard about the number 1, which I'm hanging out to hear.
Yeah, I'm tempted, Peter, to save it for Bendigo, and I have to come to Bendigo to see what the number 1 is. But I dare say a lot of the people on this webinar probably guessed it from if they're connected with me on LinkedIn or they follow my stuff. I'm pretty passionate about this one. So the number 1, and I show this as what we don't like to see here. So approaching a pedestrian crossing, and okay, a near miss there. It's a scary one. I'm going to play it again. Just right, very scary. Now, the first thing I want to say is that a zebra crossing like this, a pedestrian crossing officially called, a pedestrian crossing with no other features apart from the signs and the line marking is not a road safety feature, okay? It may have some benefits in terms of getting a few more people walking, but it is not a safety feature in the sense that we assign it 0 as a crash reduction factor, sometimes negative. Now, I predicate that on the fact that is in these medium-ish speed environments. In very low speed environments, great. Okay, you've already got the low speed, you've got general good safe area. These are fine crossings. Okay, but in these sorts of environments and high speed environments, as they sit in that photo, are not a safety feature and can cause real issues where we have the pedestrians who do have right of way walking out, vehicles distracted, going at speed. So, of course, the big safety feature that we have in our toolkit here is the raising of that crossing. And it makes the crash reduction factor go up to around the 60 or 70%. And that's for pedestrians, and if you have them for shared path crossings or raised cycleways as well. Absolutely outstanding feature from that perspective to get people walking, to provide accessible crossing points so people in wheelchairs, vision impaired people have that nice crossing. Just a wonderful, wonderful feature. I talked about roundabouts before and some of the challenges. Raised crossings around your roundabouts. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, in these CBD areas or residential areas, moving vehicles through there at pace is not the priority, okay? People immediately, when they see this, go, oh, that's going to congest the roundabout, the saturation, level of service, right? If your priority is to pump as much traffic through the middle of your CBD as you possibly can, that's a very interesting strategy to go with, and it would go against a lot of other strategies your council is likely to have. It was great to see, I think it's Bundaberg City Council putting one of our fact sheets up on their website to try to help their community understand some of the benefits of raised crossings, raised intersections, raised features. And I put a little QR code to that. Feel free to do that. And we want to encourage the community to understand a bit more about this. Okay, the design of these comes with all sorts of things to think about. And some of you have done our raised crossing principles course and raised crossing design course, where we get into the nitty-gritty detail of civil design, everything from the ramp grades, the lighting, the drainage, the pavement, the specifics around positioning, where do we position these in different points. I was having a great discussion this morning for a couple of hours with Andy Irwin from over at Auckland Transport about vibration and soil and the like associated with raised platforms. So lots to think about. But I go back to that point I made before, is our responsibility is to understand, is this going to provide a safer environment? Even if we can't meet all of the specifics we're trying to in all of those different design guides and standards and everything we've got, and then say we're going to provide a safer environment still, and we will do some design exception reporting to really confirm we're providing a safer outcome for our community, and we haven't quite met everything. But it is far, far, far better than doing nothing. Okay, so a few pictures there. If you find yourself in just scenarios it's absolutely unachievable to do the raised crossing because of a drainage issue, or I was going to say buses, absolutely not an excuse. Buses can absolutely easily navigate over raised crossings, 75 mil raised crossing, no worries. I've got lots of designs of that and they work perfectly well. So don't let the buses be an excuse. But drainage sometimes, I know, and cost and things. Some speed cushions on the approach to a priority crossing point is also a pretty amazing feature as well. And just throwing up some random other ways this is done, I wanted to point out your cycleways and providing those raised features for cycleways. Raised intersections are wonderful. You can add your pedestrian crossings on the raised intersection itself, different configurations. The new Australian Standard 1742, what is it, Part 10, coming out with a bit more clarity on this and the colour of this and these different setups. So it's been released. Has it been released? I can't remember. Somebody will know. It's either just very close to being released or has been released. So that part I think is really, really good. We're going to get some consistency there. But in our last few minutes, and I will take any questions until we have to end this, I actually threw another 5 in. So I went through these 5, but the ones that we were really wanting to put in as well, raised intersections, rumble strips. So rumble strips on the approach to some of those rural intersections. My colleague, Sam Paisley, Wendy Chan, and Iden Mystique are working on a big project at the moment for Austroads to provide guidance on rumble strips. The effectiveness of them is pretty good. So this is those things on the approach to an intersection or a level crossing that alert the driver slow, and they slow down, they're more alert and ready to go. So they're very effective at low cost. There's, again, a bit to work on around installation maintenance and those sort of things. Local area traffic management as the general category is always wonderful in those local areas to complement those lower speed limits as well. Side road activated speeds. So that's where the main road has electronic speed limit signs that will activate lower speed limits when there's a vehicle coming on the side road or is turning into a side road. Now, they've been used a lot on arterial roads in New Zealand, Victoria, South Australia, especially. But the South Australians and City of Onkaparinga and working with CASA a lot have done a lot of lower cost ones of these with solar and radar and really bringing the cost down. So that's been wonderful. And road diets, so starting to narrow down the road to bring speeds down, utilizing some of the road width for wider pedestrian areas or protected bike lanes and lessening the amount of lanes there. Okay, so I don't know if we're going to get through any more of this. I popped this up here. Safe System Solutions, we're really passionate about seeing a lot of this on the ground. We want to see great road safety infrastructure on the ground that improves the safety of our community and improves active transport. So there are some of the services that we offer. We've worked with a lot of you across Australia and New Zealand, and we want to continue to do that. But the other thing is, if you want to keep getting lots of Safe System snippets, make sure you follow Safe System Solutions on LinkedIn if you're on there, or subscribe to our email, and monthly you get sort of these snippets of road safety engineering information about things that work or things that don't work or changes in the approaches or standards or guidelines. So I think that that's about all I wanted to get to. Now, we've got lots of questions. I'm happy to answer some of those with individuals, or that email goes out and then they can just email me the question again if they want.
And would you be happy for me to just copy those down and send them through, and then we could maybe in the email tomorrow, Pete, or later in a week or so when you've had time to review them, Ken, maybe to send them out to the attendees today so people who've put questions in can see their answers?
Absolutely.
Does that work?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that and put some links to different documents and references, or point at some examples around Australia and New Zealand, because there's some absolutely fantastic stuff happening around, really innovative, exciting features on local government roads, which are improving things all around. And I see lots of the people on this are developing a lot of those projects and delivering them. So great to see our whole industry really pushing for a safer environment for all road users.
Great, Ken. So yeah, we'll do that. We'll put the question and answers. We'll also send a link to the presentation slides, if that's okay, Ken. And we've recorded this, so we'll send a link to a recording of this webinar. A lot of topics covered, a hell of a lot of questions generated. We are, like I said, running a session that Ken's going to be part of at the 2025 National Municipal Works and Engineering Conference in Bendigo. We'll also send a link to that so you can find out more about that. When you finish this webinar, you'll get a 6-question survey will pop up. We'll encourage you to fill that out. That gives us some ideas on future topics and how we can keep on improving the value offering we're providing to everyone in the association and the broader municipal works industry. Ken, we're right on time. So I'd just like to thank Katie for her work in organising today, and Ken for your excellent